Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the next episode of the Archival Discourses. We've got a packed discussion tonight and many guests. So, for the first time on this channel, I am actually joined by Newsfist. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks so much for inviting me.
And
Sorry?
returning guest, Yizz the Eunuch.
Thank you for having me back. I love your new stream series, and I'm glad to be a part of it. Thank you.
And sneaking his way in just as we go live, Hunger the Time Merchant. How are you, Hunger?
Sneaking in just in time, like I don't have an analogy. Like a med, fashionably
you wouldn't
late.
be here for another half hour. You lied to me.
I did not. No. I finished work a little bit early, and I rushed to my computer and just plugged in my mic. So yes, coming in with the steel chair.
Oh, King! It's Hunger with a steel chair.
Indeed, always a pleasure to be here, my friend.
Yes, indeed. Well, for tonight's topic, we've got a very interesting discussion. So, about a year ago, the worst event that ever happened. Can you believe it? Hamas had the audacity to kill all those poor innocent Israelis. The state of Israel is only executing its right to defend itself. Huh, guys?
Yeah.
The chutzpah to fight back. Chutzpah.
Look, if you think about it, right?
I'm American. If there's one thing I know, it's how to pronounce Jewish words.
Look, the only way Israel can defend itself is if it completely glasses every single country around it to about 300 kilometers out. And once that happens, Israel will truly be safe and will have defended itself.
Only once they've genocided the whole human race other than themselves, they'll be safe.
I appreciate that you excluded Jews from being human there. That was a subtle dig that I approve of. Very good.
Well, I aim to please. Right.
Enough joking aside, though. No, it is really ugly what's going on in the Middle East right now. It's really ugly.
No, absolutely. Well, to get us started, let's visit Twitter. So I'm just going to pull my screen up. Right. Okay, so shortly before we went live, good channel subscriber of mine, Seda Atracura, better known as Nami El Kazan, who's in the chat, he replied to your post, Yizz, announcing the stream, and very interesting little bit of reading here. An appeal to justice that unfortunately still resonates today. The Druses and the Maronites under Turkish rule from 1840 to 1860. 1862 by Charles Henry Churchill, British ambassador to the Sublime Porte. So let's just give this a read. Another delay and again time gained. Often previously when asked by anxious inquirers when the executions were to begin, he would naively reply when these gentlemen have made up their minds. And to Constantinople, in effect, the whole mass of the judicial investigations were sent. There the bubble burst. With the consent of the Christian powers, the great Druze Mohammedan retribution ended in the general reprieve for criminals, murderers, and assassins of every sect, class, and degree, engaged in the massacres. Not a hair of one of those whose heads has been or is to be touched, even including the barbarous Mohammedans of Sidon, who were tried and clearly convicted of having, without any provocation whatever, but merely out of a wild and fanatical hatred to their religion, ruthlessly slaughtered the men and violated the women of the poor Christian fugitives who fled from the mountain to that city for shelter. Christian readers, is not all this monstrous? Is it not incredible? Is it not heartless? Is it not degrading to our common faith? Is it not inhuman? Christian peoples, have you yet to learn that the best interests of Christianity in those regions once hallowed by the presence of the Lord and Saviour of mankind are sacrificed on the altar of diplomacy, frittered away by diplomatists vainly struggling against the wiles which circumvent them, and paralysed by the very power they crudely the effect to regard, regulate and guide? Christian emperors and kings, how long will you continue to desecrate the sacred cause you so ostentatiously pretend to espouse, and to bring continually reproach and disaster on the Christians of the East by your spurious protection, your baneful jealousies, your selfish intrigues, and your blundering ambitions? How long will you tarnish your crowns, sully your sceptres, and put the name of Christ to open shame by submitting to be led captives of the Turk? And Mr. Churchill there, absolutely spitting fire. And considering the date on this, Hunger, I believe he's reacting to the war that happened in Mount Lebanon in 1860 between the Druze and the Maronites.
Oh yeah, and indeed, and just on that point, if only current strongly worded letters could language in this, and that was quite based. And yes, that the 1860 wasn't really called the Lebanon War or the Mount Lebanon War. The 1860 massacre of Maronite Christians in that region by Druze, and the Druze are a very interesting people. They're a break-off Muslim sect inhabiting this same area where, overlaps with a lot of Christian communities in the Mount Lebanon region. I'm very familiar with this, but yes, this if anybody caught Apostolic Majesty and Semiagog's stream last week, it was an excellent stream. Incredible good stream. Apostolic Majesty has a great series on the Middle Eastern Christians, and the 1860 massacre in Mount Lebanon is very prominent in that history of, the plight of Middle Eastern Christians. And this is to the Ottoman Empire. The Sublime Porte is, the ruling, I guess, government cabinet of the Ottoman Empire.
No, certainly. Thank you for that, Hunger. And if people are wondering, Mr. Charles Henry Churchill, yes, he does belong to the same family as British Prime Minister and complete total traitor to this once great nation, Winston Churchill, though he is from, I think, a different branch of the family. And I did look him up, and unfortunately, he was one of the first people to propose a creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. So he seems to have that in... Yeah, so not quite as base as we first thought from reading this, sadly. So, okay, and from there, obviously... I
wonder what they held over him.
Yeah, well, as it is an anniversary, we obviously got the Israelis wanted to commemorate it. So if I could just bring this up. Hang on. So I've got so many links open, I'm just trying to find the right one. Here we are. Okay. Yep. So Mr. Bibi, Benjamin Netanyahu, gave a speech, in which we'll have a watch. Can you hear that? Okay. Can you all hear that? Okay. Can you hear it?
Yeah, it's fine. It's got subtitles though as well.
It's got subtitles.
We don't. Yeah. I'm sorry, we don't speak Hebrew.
Yeah, I don't speak Hebrew.
Sorry, my brain farted then. Ignore me.
יחקק בתולדות עמנו כיום של כאב ואובדן ושל תוגה בל תתואר. ביום הזה מפלצות החמאס הסתערו על יישובינו, על אחינו ואחיותינו שיקרים כל כך לליבנו. הם רצחו וחטפו תינוקות וילדים, מבוגרים וזקנים. הם התעללו, פצעו, אנסו, שרפו, החריבו. זכרם של אזרחינו חללי מתקפת הטרור, וזכר נופלנו הגיבורים משורות צה"ל וזרועות הביטחון, יהיה נצור בקרבנו לעד. ב7 באוקטובר הוטלנו למערכה גורלית, אבל לא הוכרענו. ההפך הוא הנכון. אנחנו אלה שפועלים להכריע ולהרתיע את אויבינו. וכפי שקרה לא פעם בתולדות ישראל, דווקא ברגעי הקושי פורצים מתוכנו כוחות פנימיים כבירים. התייצבנו יחד להגנת ארצנו, להגנת מולדתנו. גייסנו תעצומות רוח אדירות. הגדרנו את מטרות המלחמה ואנו מממשים אותן. מיטוט שלטון החמאס, החזרת כל חטופינו הביתה, החיים והחללים כאחד. זו משימה קדושה שלא נרפה ממנה עד שנשיגה. סיכול של כל איום עתידי מעזה על ישראל, והשבת תושבי הדרום והצפון בבטחה לבתיהם. כל זאת אנחנו עושים מתוך ערבות הדדית שאין דומה לה בקרב העמים. בשעת מבחן עליונה הוכחנו שוב, אנחנו עם הנצח. עם שנלחם להביא אור לעולם. עם שחותר להפצת הטוב ולמיגור הרוע. עם כלביא יקום וכארי יתנשא.
What did you say, Hunger, about chutzpah?
Yes.
I have a particular clip that comes to mind of an animated pharaoh saying enough of this Hebrew nonsense.
Yes, exactly. Enough of this Hebrew nonsense.
This is the thing that really annoys me most about Israel. Not that they're ethno-nationalists, not that they look out for themselves. I think that's entirely proper, actually, that, groups should do that. Or even that they are warlike. What annoys me is the way they pretend to be the most honorable people, the most chosen, the whiter than white of, above all nations while prosecuting this kind of war. You don't see the Muslims do this, right? The Muslims are like, oh yeah, we hate you. We're going to kill you, right? The Israel, they can never come out and say, oh yeah, we hate these people. We want to glass them. They're always like, oh, we have to do it because of our defense. We're doing it in the most moral way. At some point, if they use like a nuclear weapon, right, they'd be like, oh, this was the most moral nuclear detonation that ever took place. Unlike all previous nuclear detonations, this had like a proper moral cause. I wish they would just come out and be like, oh yeah, we're trying to start a war. We want to kill all these people. Like it just, sorry.
It really rubs me the wrong way for the same reason. It sickens me for someone to stand up there and literally proclaim, we are the most noble, the most holy, we are acting the most righteous of all peoples, of all nations, while they literally are doing a genocide and like doing clandestine glow ops and terror attacks on all their neighbors. Like, there's a reason why nobody likes you. I'm just saying, there's a reason. And it's this is it. This is it.
And that reason is misinformation. Clearly, that reason is, of course, not a large enough censorship regime on the internet.
The reason is clearly the rising anti-Semitism on social media.
Yes, indeed.
If no one knew about
10 countries? Question mark.
110 was Afghanistan.
True.
One thing I will say is I remember AA commented on this saying the speech is very Magian, and I agree with him, because if we call back to that stream Hunger and I did on Spengler, this is entirely dualistic thinking. Like, we are the light bringers of the world. We make the world better and safer, and our enemies are the evil, dark demons.
Wasn't Lucifer called the light bringer?
He was,
yes,
and I was going to get to that.
I wonder about
so you read my mind.
I mean, the thing is, the way they seem to define peace or perfect defense is when literally every person that would oppose them is killed. I mean, that's not. That's not diplomacy or peace or anything. Like, I've seen a few clips actually going around Twitter that sort of like make the claim that I think Netanyahu said this, or possibly Schneerson, that they just keep negotiations going in order to make it look like they're negotiating, whilst at the same time they have absolutely no intention of changing from their predetermined war goals. And I think that bears out, really. Like, remember when this whole thing kicked off and they're like, oh, with Gaza, oh, we're going to have a ceasefire. Oh, we're going to have a pause. There was never a ceasefire. There was never a pause. I was just like, no, it's never going to happen. Why, in what world would it be in Israel's interest to have any kind of ceasefire, any kind of pause?
No, it doesn't benefit them at all. It's complete. I mean, we can talk about this. The Israeli PR machine, I mean, across literally every platform, is absolutely horrendous for people with a functioning brain.
Yes.
Like bombing a civilian airport or bombing a couple apartment buildings in a different country,
or like those videos where they blew up
miles
that
away.
Remember that recently?
Yeah. That's self-defense. That bombing a different country is self-defense.
Like, yes, we are the most noble and righteous people, so we're going to bomb and maim the children of people we don't like. Isn't that glorious?
Also,
bombing, those children are future terrorists.
Of course.
And indeed, and also bombing, historical relics and World Heritage sites. That's defending our nation, right?
And I love the way it's argued, essentially, that this is always against the Muslims whenever they're dealing with the West. Like, there weren't any Christians in Palestine or Lebanon. Like, they didn't blow up this incredibly old Orthodox church. No. Like, there aren't any Christians. Don't get angry about the Christians we're killing and the Christian history that we're destroying. It's all the Muslims, and you don't
and ignore all those videos of when Christians visit Israel and people from Israel spit at them. Just ignore that.
Yeah.
I hear it's a cherished custom Actually, you know what I mean, right? It's their culture. Yes. How dare you be so racist?
Well, it is their culture.
in my blood.
I don't disagree.
Yeah. So, do you want to watch the rest of this, or can we keep talking about it?
No. Enough of this Jewish nonsense.
Yeah, I think we've got enough from BB's speech here. You know, they're very proud of themselves.
Where I would like to move the conversation then is, this is not the rhetoric of someone who is looking for peaceful compromise. This is the rhetoric of someone who is looking to win a holy war. This is the rhetoric of someone who has already made up his mind and already has a plan of action and is selling it to the people that he knows that he needs to rely on to achieve his goals. This is the kind of rhetoric of a despotic leader, of a tyrant. This is not the kind of rhetoric of someone who is looking for what we might consider a more peaceful or modern compromise. Now, granted, he lives in the Middle East, and it's a much different place than where we live, at least for now. And I don't think that you can look at the tone of the 2 minutes of this speech that we looked at and say that he is looking for any type of peaceful compromise with any neighboring country in the Middle East. He's looking for total victory, obliteration of the enemies, and total surrender. This is not the rhetoric of a man who wants diplomacy. It's a rhetoric of a man who is winning a war and only wishes death and pain to his enemies.
No, absolutely. And something I want to bring up, actually, obviously I brought up Arnold Toynbee on my channel before, but he's got this concept, which I think is quite interesting. I want to discuss how it relates to Israel. He's got this concept called challenge and response, which is this idea that for a civilization to develop and grow, it has to have the what he calls the golden mean of adversity, where there's enough pressure so it can kind of develop and grow, but not so much that it collapses and is destroyed, and not enough pressure that it kind of becomes lazy and degenerate. And so I can't help but wonder whether Israel's leadership are consciously thinking we need to put ourselves into this geopolitical situation where we've got enemies on all sides and everybody hates us, because we need to sort of facilitate this constant pressure so we're always on our guard, so to speak. And that's how I think that links back to challenge and response. It's almost like the Israelis are aware of this, and that they're worried about becoming complacent if they just become like a regular peaceful country.
I don't know. I think the whole persecution thing is very much built into the Jewish character, like not without reason, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I'm like, oh my God, they've, have no reason to ever feel persecuted. They do. But I think that this has become sort of part of their character. Like, one of the things I keep thinking about Israel is I'm not actually sure what they would do if they won. A bit like leftists who define themselves sort of, in a struggle against like a thing. Right. And then when they actually win and they, become the man, so to speak, they don't know what to do because they have
It's very much like the transgender activist people that are complaining about no representation and how they're oppressed, when like literally every major corporation and government in the Western world celebrates them and gives them an entire month and bends down and kisses their feet. It's like, it reminds me of that.
Well, this is the thing, right? Traditionally, when such groups actually gain power and they run out of a purpose, instead of powering down and being like, okay, we have achieved our goals, they actually tend to get even more extreme and search for, more goals, smaller goals, more unachievable goals in order to keep that sort of mindset going.
Essentially what, like civilizational mission creep, basically.
Yeah. Well, I guess
this
you
is the
could
story.
say religion
This is the story
is
of the United States. This is the story of the United States after the Cold War. When there were no enemies left to fight. What did we do? We bombed random countries in Kosovo, in the Middle East, because we could, and because we were just bored.
And you can also say the same with the British Empire to an extent, because after the Pax Britannica, we're like, oh, you know what? We have to destroy the Germans. We have to grind them into the dust. So total war that doesn't care if we damage ourselves. And then, they weren't quite defeated. Well, need to double tap them. World War II time.
Don't get me started on the evils of World War II. I'll be here all night.
I mean, you could say that this is sort of the part or one of the upshots of any kind of totalizing or universal ideology, which, as much as the woke centrists like hate to be pointed out, liberalism is like classical liberalism. Its core of universalism kind of lends itself very easily to this idea that we must bring civilization to the entire world, and certain strains of Judaism are also very like this. Particularly the more apocalyptic strains. I think Chabad is like this. Various ideas usually revolving around something has to be done to force God's hand in order to bring about the return of the Meshiach. So some of them are like, you got to do the red heifer. There are other sort of Hermetic strains that are like, how does it go? So I think
are those the divine number guys that think they can use like secret math to do this?
No. So the Hermetic idea is that at any given time, there are like 20 or 30, I think they call them bright sparks in the Jewish people, right? And these are sort of like learned teachers that carry the brightest of the sparks. See, the sparks were scattered by the shattering of the Qipaloth, right, and distributed throughout the world. Now, there are certain strains of thought, religious thought, Hermetic thought, that say that what has to happen is that all of the sparks of light, or as many as physically possible, have to be gathered together in one geographic area in order to trigger the thing, right? And there are many strains of Jewish religious thought that revolve around this thing, right? And it's very much ... profit, because exactly what happens when the thing comes about also varies, right? The Meshiach will return. There's a concept called the world to come, which, unlike the Christian conception, is not is actually of this world. So it is a state that is brought about in the world, as opposed to the Christian conception that it only happens in the next world. And many commentators have pointed out that because the world to come is seen as something that will actually manifest in this world, it drives certain strains of religious thought that seek to accelerate this outcome by forcing the fulfillment of prophecy, if that makes sense. So if you look at the red heifer, it's a really, really good example of this kind of thinking. Basically, that instead of, say, the Christian conception, where God has to provide the perfect red cow, you know what I mean? Like someone just stumbles across it. The Jewish thing is we will make the red cow. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a very, very different kind of like strain of thought when it comes to the future and fulfillment of prophecy.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you for showing Newsfist. So,
can I go back to what I was saying, because I was trying to preface something to ask Hunger.
Oh, sure, go for it.
When I said earlier, before we got off on that, when I said that this was not the rhetoric of someone who sought peace, where I was stumbling towards with that statement was, Hunger Merchant, with what you know from your family in Lebanon and from your connections that you have in the Middle East, does it seem like the actions of Israel are ones that are looking to have any kind of peaceful outcome, or does it look like they are building up to be on a war path and have a total war with everyone around them? Because it looks like they're just wanting war and not seeking any kind of peace at all.
Well, that's my opinion too. And I know some people in my personal life that disagree with that, but that is definitely my opinion. And that is definitely a common opinion among people over there. I mean, first of all, you have to understand that Lebanon has always been a very divided country. Not just divided along religion between Christians and Muslims, but between political parties and factions. And so there's no pro-Israeli people in Lebanon, but there are people in Lebanon who are anti-Hezbollah, which are two very different things. Yes. And so depending on who you ask, the most optimistic perspective is like, oh, if we just get rid of Hezbollah, like we won't have the internal problems that Lebanon has been facing, because they're a terrorist group, they're sanctioned by the United States, we can open up to the West if we get rid of these people, which is not a pro-Israeli position. They don't support, their own country and their own people being bombed. This is a minority, I should say, but it's a significant minority of some people in Lebanon. I would say the majority of most people across all the religions is that, this is unacceptable, and Israel will not stop, at just Lebanon. First of all, they're going to fail in their objective to finish off Hezbollah. That's one. They're just going to fail. It's not possible. They would have to occupy 2/3 of the entire country, which is just, will Israel do it? Maybe, but will they succeed in doing that? I don't think so. And that's going to involve, like, the Syrians and the Iranians are not going to stand by if 2/3 of Lebanon is basically occupied.
And
there's no way that's going to happen.
When it comes to a military engagement like that, Israel is tiny. And by population, they just don't have the numbers of manpower for massive occupation and expansion. They just don't have it.
But the only thing I would say is the areas that are under occupation are not that big. And so, I mean, if they were trying to occupy like the entire Middle East, then yeah, they'd be way overstretching themselves. But
if Gaza, they were going my point was, if they were going to try to occupy 2/3 of Lebanon, wouldn't that mean that there would be more involvement from other neighboring countries and involvement with Syria, Iran, wanting to push 100%. Back on them? And then they would need manpower in other places. So because the IDF is not that big. Like, they don't have like hundreds of thousands of troops, do they?
Yes,
they do.
None of this is possible without the intervention of the United States. Sorry to cut you off, Hunger, but it's so clear that Israel really wants the United States and the West generally to get involved. They do not have the manpower to prosecute this war, as far as I can see.
Yeah, I think they're just trying to escalate things as much as they can. So they hope the American government will just then send boots on the ground.
Yes, and that's exactly it. So just addressing what you said, Yizz, Israel does have hundreds of thousands of troops. First of all, it's a country of, I want to say, like 10 million people. I believe it's 10 million.
Yeah, I think it's a little south of 10 million. But the last I looked at the IDF, it was just north of 100,000.
A little more than
troops.
6.
Okay, well, when I looked at the IDF, it was a little more than 100,000, and I just. To me, it just seems ludicrous to think that they can go to war and try to expand and hold territory in the Middle East when literally all of their neighbors hate them and are ready for war and conflict with them. I just don't see how they can have, unless, obviously, without, like, America sending in boots on the ground, of course. But just on their own, I just don't see them waging a successful expansionist campaign. I just don't see it as a possibility.
They're not going to. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just about the IDF's numbers. So this is from Wikipedia, so take it with a pinch of salt. But according to Wikipedia, the IDF has 169,500 active personnel, 465,000 reserve personnel. So they're people who have had military service in the past couple of years. Okay. But their total available for military service is around 2.5 to 3 million. That's both male and female.
So half the country.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes. So because in Israel, military service is mandatory. You have a mandatory 18-month or 2-year military service period. So literally, adult citizen in the country.
Okay.
With some exceptions, the Hasidic Jews are exempted for religious reasons.
Okay.
The Orthodox Jews are exempted, but every secular male and female adult in Israel does about 2 years of military service in the IDF. That does not make them good soldiers, but that does give Israel a lot of manpower and familiarity with, firearms to conduct war.
Okay, well, still, I'm just curious though, like, what would be the logistic numbers of trying to take and hold territory? Because if you're having to suck up a huge portion of your citizenry to be reserve troops to hold territory, who is doing all the necessary infrastructural jobs and civic stuff that has to keep your country functioning?
You have no economy. If you switch to a total Stalin war economy, you just don't have an economy.
So again,
you would have to use every citizen available to fight the war.
So they would have to rely on United States personnel and money to stay afloat, basically.
Yeah.
And I believe that at this point, I think Netanyahu believes that he'll still get it, but I don't know. We'll see.
I will have to say that I do think it's... Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I was just, on the U.S. involvement, we're running into the limit of how much the U.S. is willing to get involved. And we were just talking about this yesterday on Discord and Dragons.
Yeah.
The Israelis have asked the U.S. to, bomb, I don't know, either the nuclear facilities in Iran or the oil facilities in Iran, and if that were to be the case, we would have $12 gasoline, by Friday. If that were to ever happen, we would have $12 gasoline by Friday.
Not to mention a world of other problems if we bombed Iran.
Exactly. And so in that case, we're running up against the limit of how much the United States can really help Israel. Will America cross that line? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
It is just too insane. But these are insane people we're dealing with.
Yeah. I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? Like, that is literally the $1 million question of the moment, right? Mm-hmm. What is going to happen after the US election, and how will that affect the US relationship with Israel? Like, I would argue that in some ways, this is a crucially important question, not just for the US and the Middle East, but just for the entire world, because if whoever gets into office as the US president decides to prosecute a wider war with Iran, just the spike in energy prices is going to make everything go insane. Which tangentially, by the way, I had an interesting thought I'd like to run by you guys. What if net zero, like the actual purpose of net zero, is because the West is already committed to World War III, and they know that their major weakness is petroleum, and so therefore they're trying to get as much sort of energy infrastructure in place before the war properly kicks off, so that they will be somewhat insulated from the oil price shock.
Awesome.
No, I agree with you completely on that, Newsfist. I think that's been the motive for net zero for a long time, because essentially they're thinking, well, if we can make ourselves to create our own renewable energy sources, we're not then reliant on the Middle East for oil. But I think that's a stupid strategy, because we can be dependent with our own resources without the Middle East without doing net zero, because places like Britain still have like hundreds of years worth of coal and shale gas. So if we actually extracted our own resources, we could be energy sufficient without net zero.
Exactly. Britain has that, and the United States, remember, was energy self-sufficient just a few years ago under Trump. We could do it again.
It was the largest oil exporter in the entire world for a couple of years while Trump was in.
Yeah.
It was amazing to see. Like, they're always like, we got to have another war in the Middle East, bros. We need the oil. It's like China going to war with Taiwan for rice. It's ludicrous.
One thing I just want to address is Mr. Namiel Carlson, who shared that passage I read earlier. He's got a couple of interesting comments in the chat, because from what I've read, he's actually in Lebanon. So Hunger is completely right. I'm currently in Lebanon, and the mood is that the Israeli are not here on the path of peace. Okay, that's not good. And it's this: I live in the Christian region. Everyone is afraid that the Israelis are here to stay. They're displacing a lot of Shia Muslims who are settling in Christian and Sunni regions. That can't be good for the ethno-religious tensions.
I can confirm that just briefly on that point. In my village, which is not close to the border with Israel, we are getting refugees from the south, and they are mostly Shia Muslims. But people are being, people are trying to be very accommodating, but that's going to quickly sour. But if the war goes on, then everyone will be suffering equally. So yeah, I can confirm there are Shia refugees being displaced, and they are going to other areas in Lebanon, especially with Christian areas.
Mm-hmm. And this next comment, and this says, in this displacement can easily cause a civil war, which is exactly what Israel wants. Just today, they're inciting us, the Christians, to take this opportunity to revolt on Hezbollah. Yes, from conversations I've had with you, Hunger, that basically it's the vast majority of Lebanese Christians are not pro-Israel, but there's like a very militant minority who are, because they basically think this actually goes back to something on that AM stream you mentioned, because he was talking about Lebanese Christians as this weird movement called like Christian Zionism, where these Lebanese radical Christians basically want to turn Lebanon into basically a Christian Israel, where like it's a Christian like only ethno state, and it's just like a carbon copy of Israel. And to me, that just seems like a completely destructive path, to be really frank with you. So
no, it's not exactly
can't
Christian
handle.
Zionism. It's not exactly Christian Zionism in the way that Americans would understand it, but it is. There is a very significant, very loud, significant minority that basically wants a Christian ethno state. Yeah, so that's not the same as a Christian Zionism, but I completely understand what you mean.
Oh yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Do you know what Christian Zionism is in the modern context, Hitman?
Well, from my understanding, it's just the isn't it just not the American evangelicals or other radical Protestants that support Israel?
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, I mean, it's more complicated than that, and actually ties into what I was saying before about Jewish Hamitic thought. Christian Zionism is. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, because
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry, because I think you've talked about it before. It was I think it was like the Schofield Bible and other stuff like that.
That's right. That's right. But it sort of blends Christian and Jewish thought, so that the Christian millennials also believe that in order for a thing to happen, all the Jews must congregate in Israel or something, except in the Christian version, the thing that will happen is that Jesus will return. And this is a very, very old idea that, quite frankly, certain Jewish interests have used to control Christians for ages. For example, when the Jews were agitating to be let back into England after the expulsion, there was a Rabbi Ben Israel who was going around speaking in English cities, and his contention was that the 13th lost Jewish tribe had been discovered, and it was in fact the Native American Indians. Therefore, the only country in the world that did not allow the mission-free movement of Jews was England. And unless England readmitted the Jews, it was impossible for the Messiah to come again. And this was what they argued to the Protestants, which is one of the reasons why the Protestants were amenable to revoking the expulsion.
And also, for those of you who might not recall, that is why in the 70s the concept of the moral majority was brought up. So this evil Christian Zionism element of the United States Israel war machine in the 70s and 80s. They wanted to sell that to ye old normie Christian in America. And that is how they got so many people hoodwinked and on board with forever wars and passively supporting them. My family most affected.
Sorry. Go on, Hitman.
Well,
sorry.
Yeah, one other concept I want to run by you guys, I want to see if you've heard of it, is are any of you familiar with the concept of British Israelism?
No, I've never heard that before.
No, I mean, neither.
Heard of it?
No,
it's crazy. It basically, if you go back to the original Jewish diaspora, the theory of British Israelism argues that essentially, because there were 12 tribes of Israel and then there were 2 lost tribes, British Israelism is a theory that argues that the British and Americans are the 2 lost tribes of Israel, and it's a theory that's been used to try and convince Brits and Americans to support Israel, because it's like, you're just like us, you're like our long lost cousins. Essentially, it's completely insane.
I'm beginning to see
the Anglo Jew. There's a concept of the Anglo Jew that's a part of the future races of America. Have you guys seen that meme?
No,
I haven't seen that. No,
I mean, I might have seen the meme, but I didn't know it was talking about exactly that. I see a lot of memes.
I mean, I just ran this through Grok. I can't believe I've never heard of this before. But this is essentially this similar kind of thing that they were doing with the Protestants. They interpret various biblical passages to support their claims, suggesting that references to Israel in the Bible often refer to the British people rather than the Jewish people or the modern state of Israel. They see Britain as having a special role in God's plan, often linked to the idea of spreading Christianity and maintaining a moral or spiritual leadership over the world.
What does that sound like?
Apparently,
that's something you're going to dig into. I could see this as something you're going to dig into very deeply.
Apparently, they even said that the Union Jack represents Judah, Israel, and Jacob, and there are the alleged linguistic similarities between Hebrew and English.
Oh my god! This is almost
next episode of Empire of Lies. Next episode of Empire of Lies.
Yeah. Actually, that'd make a great episode.
Well, is any comments after that video, or shall we move on?
Let's move on.
Let's move on.
We can move on to containment kissing here.
Can I just ask Hunger a quick question before we move on? Since you're in Lebanon,
I'm not. I'm not in Lebanon. I'm in America.
But you have connections to Lebanon. So was the upshot of the civil wars or sort of previous altercations between religion a sort of balkanization inside Lebanon, where you have specifically Christian communities and Shia and Sunni and Jewish communities? Like, was there a sort of religious fragmentation, and it was that allowed stability?
I mean, so before Balkanization, there was something called Lebanonization. You know, the Balkanization came out of the 1990s, fall of Yugoslavia, and before that, in the 70s, that was when we had the Lebanese Civil War. And so, so it was basically a ethnic cleansing between Christians and Muslims on both sides. You know, just to be fair, on both sides, and that the settlement to that conflict, which was, if anybody's looked into the Lebanese Civil War, it was basically Game of Thrones in the Middle East, that you had like multiple factions, and each faction, one day they would be an ally, the next day they would be an enemy of every other faction involved in the entire war. I've talked about this a few times with Hitman, but what happened in the war is that, yes, clearly these areas that used to be more mixed, or areas that had a lot of tension with overlapping religious groups, became more, balkanized. That's still like that today. I mean, you can find Muslims in like a general Christian area, and you can find Christians in a generally Muslim area, but it's I mean, those places are still around. My village is in a mostly Muslim area. My village is a Christian Orthodox village. So like, it's not that it's impossible, it's that it became much worse, as a result of the war.
Mate, I don't know if I believe what you're saying. I've been reliably informed that diversity is our greatest strength, TM. And therefore, the idea that certain religious or ethnic groups would self-select and balkanize in order to reduce conflict is just something I can't countenance. I don't believe you.
I can also tell you from personal experience. We also have redlining. We have redlining in Lebanon, which is where if a Muslim wants to buy property in a Christian area, they will do everything in their power to prevent that from happening, because they will upset the continuity and homogeneity of the community.
That sounds very racist.
That does happen.
That sounds incredibly racist. I can't. Why has that country not been erased by liberal and tolerant America? I can't count. Oh my god. Sorry, Hitman. I just really wanted an answer to that question. I didn't mean to like derail the stream.
No, it's fine. And so before we move on, I've got one last thing to say to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
Good day, sir.
You get nothing. Right. Okay. So Konstantin Kissin has recently done a video. For months, I've avoided commenting on Israel's war. A year on from October 7th, I'm officially off the fence. Oh, really now? Our friend Morgoth, he's off the fence, guys. Konstantin Kissin exposes pro-Palestine YouTuber in heated debate. And
I know who that person Konstantin is talking to in that video, but I will not say more. That's Saifuddin, the Bitcoin guy.
Oh, really?
Oh, okay.
Well, let's.
I didn't know what he looks like.
What has Konstantin got to say to us, eh?
Fence about Israel's war. Here's why. Exactly a year ago, when thousands of Hamas militants crossed Israel's border to engage in an orgy of medieval violence, I knew little about Israel and had no opinion about the long-running conflict there. I've never been to Israel. I've never been to Gaza. I've never been to the West Bank. It's not a conflict I studied at university or read about extensively. People on both sides who care.
What's Morgoth say? Let's just play the hatchling. I don't know anything. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I was about to say hatchling too. Yeah, you're right.
Every day he looks more like Ben Shapiro.
Yep, every day.
No, seriously, right? Like it is.
Like, look, he's even got the open collar
Really
shirt, the open jacket. Like, yeah.
See, someone in the chat, like, man, that is. Do you think, right? Like Shapiro has like a sort of gene seed or something? You know what I mean, right? That he's like implanting.
There's just like a Zionist assembly line
and
somewhere.
Shapiro have in common? What could Kissinger and Shapiro have in common? I wonder.
I couldn't possibly imagine.
Care passionately about this issue find it hard to believe, but in truth, most people are like this. That's why, for many months after the October 7th attacks, I avoided commenting on the war or even discussing it on our show. Instead, I read, watched, and listened to the endless commentary, debates, and discussions to understand what people on various sides were saying. Having gathered those perspectives, I then did my best to apply first principles thinking to the arguments I heard. Thinking from first principles means stripping whatever you're trying to analyze.
Sorry, I've just got to address the comment. Ardent Party. It's Abby. She's a secret clone factory.
Oh no, it's the
that's what she's hiding in those Khazar milkers, guys.
I was going to say it's the Khazar milker conundrum.
Listen. For all my hatred of Ben Shapiro, leave his sister out of this. Okay, she did nothing wrong. It was 7 million. Okay.
I think you're thinking with the little merchant with that statement.
You need to get a little hat for your little merchant, mate.
Get a kippa for your condom.
Open borders for hot women. Okay, just that's all I'll say.
Okay, I can sign up for that.
Oh dear. Well, what did the Italian Prime Minister? What was his name?
Berlusconi.
Berlusconi. Yes. Yeah, that's it. All immigrants are deported, but the cute ones can stay.
Oh yeah.
Based.
He was so real for that.
Yeah.
Abby's the only one that can unite the Middle East.
She can enfold the entire Middle East in her massive bosom and bring.
We all agree. This is the key to world peace.
It's Khazar mommy milker nationalism, guys.
The one solution to world peace: the Booba truth regime.
The Booba truth regime.
Oh, mate, that's a keeper.
That's a good one, man. You've been sitting on that, or did you just come up with that?
I mean, I did it the other week when AA was like, "Oh, there's this woman on GB News with her tits. Let's just take a picture of it and share it on Twitter." And I was like, "The Booba truth regime." It was a
very clever, sir. Very clever. I salute you for your memeing. That's good. That's good. Oh my god!
This is when you know we've become the unpopular opinions replacement, because when we start talking about Booba and random other news,
that's when the screen really shines.
Oh, right, okay.
Down to its core and working back from there.
Sorry?
No, I was just going to say let's continue. I want to hear what he has to say. I'm sorry.
Context is extremely important to understanding. But when it comes to highly emotive situations like this one, people often flood you with emotional context, which does not support the argument they're actually making. There are some obvious examples in this debate, which we will address shortly. First principles thinking helps you see the structure of arguments. The logic of an argument is like the skeleton of a body. You cannot see it from the outside, but it is usually the cause of why the body moves the way that it does. Getting to the skeleton of an argument is essential to understanding it. This was my approach when we had prominent pro-Palestine guests like Bassem Youssef and Norman Finkelstein on trigonometry, as well as pro-Israel guests like Ben Shapiro and Natasha Hausdorff. It was also my approach when I hosted a fiery debate on the subject at Dissident Dialogues, and when Safety Namus invited me to discuss this issue on this podcast. So what does first principle...
I love, because you just mentioned a hunger about who that guy was, but I love that he's presenting here like, I was just inquiring into the matter with this man, and completely hides the fact it was like a proper argument they were having.
I have a feeling we are about to be exposed to some truly manipulative midwitchery, like just the cadence and the first principles thinking. Like that sounds
this
smart.
reminds me of. This reminds me of a Newsfist of the early days of midwit centrism with Sam Harris and the old original IDW guys, like the Weinstein brothers and them. This kind of talk reminds me of that new atheism shit from around 2010.
It does.
Do you want to know who he actually reminds me of the way he's speaking? Kraut and T.
I never watched that.
Yeah, the Kraut used to always talk like this, except he had a very German accent.
I know exactly what you're referring to, and yes, you're completely right. These IDW centrist, anti-woke centrist types, it's all about. It's like they're obsessed with the conversation. They're obsessed with the discourse and how you're supposed to have a conversation and how you're.
As long as you agree with them, and if not, you're an extremist.
Yeah.
Holy shit! I wish you had Strong Monkey here.
If you have any opinion,
the endless conversation
outside the current Overton window, like no, you're not allowed to be here. You're just not allowed to ask a question.
Well, it's just containment, like, you know, on a very, very basic level, really. I mean, you know, you could make the argument that if the facts of this were self-evident, then you wouldn't need so much propaganda in order to convince people that what they're actually seeing, like, you know, the complete glassing of Gaza, for example, was a bad thing. I mean, you know, what else has he got to say? Sorry.
No, that's all right. But all I'll say is that we're going to see chutzpah reach critical mass.
Okay, let's do
thinking tell us about the conflict. First, the easiest way to understand a complicated problem is to find a comparable situation about which you already know what to think. For example, if we accept that October 7th was a terrorist attack, as I believe most people do, the obvious approach would be to compare it to other terrorist attacks in recent history. That, as it happens, is impossible, because on a proportionate basis, the Western world has never experienced an attack on this scale. If we take 9/11, the most impactful terrorist attack in living memory, which shook the world's dominant superpower to its very core,
which your people did, by the way, you schmuck. God, I hate this guy.
People were killed in a country of 285 million people. On October 7th, approximately 1,200 people were killed in a country of just 9 million people. Some keep calling October 7th Israel's 9/11. That isn't remotely true. If October 7th was Israel 9/11, on a per capita basis, only 100 people would have been killed. In other words,
in my view, October 7th was worse than 9/11.
Of course.
Yes, the Christian
not only was it
the Christian view that it's not that every life is sacred, but every life is sacred in proportion to its per capita impact.
That is such an incredibly Jewish statement. I don't even know if Kristen is aware of it. I don't even know if he comprehends what a Talmudic Jewish statement that is he just made.
Therefore, for every one Jew that died on October 7th, 10 Americans should have died. That would have been proportionate to what happened.
I fucking hate this way of thinking so much.
Me too. It's cancer.
It's so blatantly supremacist. But it's okay when they do it.
Well, dude, don't you know they're the chosen people? They get to be arrogant and supremacist.
Yeah, so
we don't.
I keep getting told. Chosen for what, though? I guess is the
well, don't ask me. I'll get the channel banned.
I just want to call back to the last time I had you on, Yizz, when we were talking about the war on terror, and we talked about the memory of 9/11 and about how no one really talks about it anymore. And it's because of shit like this. Basically, October the 7th is now dominates our consciousness. No one talks about 9/11 anymore because we're all talking about October the 7th or that other date they want you to think about, January the 6th. These are the new absolute events that have to dominate the discourse.
I think one of the another reason that we don't talk about 9/11 is how captured the media is in the United States and how the discourse around 9/11 was particularly squashed post 9/11 because people had questions, people wanted answers, and it was quite clear that we couldn't get them. And the people who continued to press for them got killed, disappeared, and unpersoned.
I mean, I haven't seen any polling data on this, but I would be willing to make a reasonable bet that a majority of Americans at this point believe there is something sussy about 9/11, right?
Yeah.
Regardless, even if they don't know exactly what. So 9/11 is sort of a potentially dangerous tool at this point, right? Because to reference 9/11 also leads to certain other topics that well, you don't really want to discuss, you know, the deep state, you know, the insurance payouts,
WMDs,
WMDs.
going after bin Laden, that kind of thing.
Oh,
like,
yeah, my God.
Like once you start scratching at that, it leads to places the deep state doesn't want us to look at or think about.
I think 9/11 was like my first proper rabbit hole.
Mine too.
Actually, like, you know, I remember seeing it happen on TV, and I was like, that doesn't look right. I remember the first thing I thought when they, I'm like, that just doesn't look. I couldn't explain exactly like why. I was like, my sussy detector just went off like massively. And then, you know, it was really, really interesting in Australia, right? So for about the first couple of months, everyone was really sympathetic, right? Like if you were an American in Australia at the time, everyone would be like super nice to you. And they're like, oh my God, it's terrible. It's a tragedy. Then they invaded Afghanistan and everyone was like, yeah, okay. Like, you know, we're prepared to let that go. And then they invaded Iraq and everybody's mood just completely flipped because it was totally obvious by this point that invading Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. Even before all the stuff came out. I remember it very, very distinctly. And at that point, Americans started basically like not wearing American flags when they were going to Australia. They put on Canadian flags because everyone was just so incredibly pissed off because they felt like they'd been had. You know, they were all sympathetic and then they just used that sympathy in order to launch this massive war.
And let me just, speaking of what you called your sussy meter going off, here in East Tennessee where I live, as you might imagine, it's not very heavily populated. And when I think I was 14 or 13, it was in the early 90s, one of my, is it a third cousin? 1, 2, 3. I think it's a third cousin, but a sibling of someone who was connected to my uncle in some way. We're all connected here in the holler. Got a hold of his father's crop dusting plane and went for a joyride for like an hour. And within that hour, he was contacted via a helicopter that saw him contacted the local National Guard base, and they sent someone out to let him know that he was flying in a zone he wasn't supposed to be in and he didn't have clearance. So you're telling me that here in BFE, Tennessee, some yokel in a crop dusting plane immediately gets attention from authorities and the military, but hijacked passenger planes get to fly around the most populated place in America for an hour without getting military escort or military intervention? I'm sorry, I don't buy it.
You know why that was, Yizz? Because Dick Cheney, about a couple of months earlier, had changed the rules so that all orders to
had to go directly to him. I know, no, dude, I've been down these rabbit holes too. I get it.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, had to go through him. So
right.
Sorry, I don't want to do. Let's hear.
Yeah, let's not get off on 9/11. I'm sorry.
Let's hear more from Kissa and I. How much bullshit can we get in what few minutes?
You have no idea how bad it gets.
Oh God. Okay.
We'll move on. You mentioned Canada Newsfist, but Ardent Hardy, indeed, Hitman. Meanwhile, Newfoundland still remember March 31st, 1949 as our biggest loss. Yes, I too would also cry if I was part of Canada.
Is that when you got sold out and became a property of Canada, property of the Commonwealth? Is that what happened in 49?
Well, I think he's talking about when Newfoundland was added to Canada, because it was still British overseas territory before 1949.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought, because I think he's told me that before.
Right.
October 7th was at least 12 times as bad as 9/11. And that's before accounting for the fact that Hamas took hundreds of hostages, many of whom have been killed since. So the obvious question is, if thousands of armed Mexicans had penetrated the southern border of the United States, killed 36,000 Americans, and dragged off thousands of hostages, how would America have reacted? Would there still be a Mexico to speak of? Whatever your view of the history of this conflict, I believe the logic of this is impenetrable. However, there are some persuasive arguments from the anti-Israel camp which are aimed at contextualizing October 7th. Let's look at them. Number one, history did not start on October 7th. The crux of this argument, when broken down to its central premise, is that the state of Israel is illegitimate. In this conception, Israel was created because land belonging to Palestinians was taken by Western powers and given to European Jews fleeing the Holocaust. Palestinians were not consulted, did not give consent, and found themselves kicked out of their homes. Israel is a settler colonial state. 2. October 7th was a response to Israeli brutality and oppression. Those of you who watched my debate with Safety Namas will recall that he made this argument repeatedly. The people of Gaza and the West Bank are treated so badly, he argued, the response we saw on October 7th was totally understandable. An act of resistance aimed at redressing the wrongs they have suffered. 3.
Pause.
Israel is killing civilians.
It was not... I watched that debate he had with Saifuddin Ammous. It was retaliation. Okay, in a war, Gaza is under siege and has been under siege by Israel since 2007. And so this is not, this is not a peaceful area of the conflict. It is being blockaded by the Israelis, and therefore, which is an act of war under any circumstance, therefore, Hamas is going to attack Israel and break the blockade. And because Israel is holding tens of thousands of hostages, of Palestinian hostages in Israeli jails that are not being released, obviously, when Hamas did what they did on October 7th, they killed people, took hostages, and we're trying to trade the hostages they took to get their people out of jail as well. That is the context. So I need to we move on.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
The scenes of parents pulling their children out of rubble speak for themselves. 4. Israel is engaged in indiscriminate attacks, which is why so many innocent people are dying. This argument aims to prove that Israel is the bad guy in this war because it is killing lots of people, either deliberately or due to a callous disregard for the lives of Palestinians. These are, to the best of my knowledge, the 4 principal arguments made by the anti-Israel side. If there are others, please let me know in the comments and I will address them in a follow-up video. Let's go through the arguments one by one. And for the sake of argument, let us accept that every point in each argument is valid and historically accurate. I know many viewers will find this objectionable, but I believe the best way to unpack this entire discussion is to take people's arguments as valid and see if they make sense. The first argument, whose central premise is that Israel is illegitimate, seems to be at the core of every debate. It feels reasonable and logical to many people to contextualize Israel's response to October 7th in this way. After all, if Israel was created through illegitimate means, it puts the discussion on an entirely different footing, doesn't it? Well, actually, no, it doesn't. Again, let's think from first principles. If we believe every pro-Palestinian claim and accept that Israel was created through the forced placement of European Jews in a foreign land by Western powers, we
not wrong.
Undeniable.
must look for a comparable situation in which a country was created through some form of displacement of the native population. Most of you live in such a country. The United States, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada are all the products of invasion.
What the hell?
Yeah, he went there.
This piece of shit, this piece of Jewish shit, this anti-white piece of shit. I hate this guy.
Go off.
America was not made by refugees. America was a land forged by pioneers and ingenious, high IQ, high-spirited Anglo-Christians. We made this country from nothing but a savage wilderness and savage natives who lived here. We built this place. We were not refugees displaced by a massive war. We were mostly people who came here that had the spirit and were led by God to build a better way. This is absolute despicable anti-white Jewish lies, and I won't stand for it. It's bullshit.
Australia is the same. You could make a sort of medium argument to this effect about New Zealand because, like, at least the Maori were settled and had territory. But the New Zealanders made a treaty with the Maori. Trying to compare it to Australia is just insane. Like, there's no... The Australian Aboriginals did not have a civilization. There has been much historical revisionism trying to change that fact. But the truth of the matter is that there was a reason, why it was regarded as sort of terra nullius. It was just populated by savages to the point that, this is a really interesting thing. If you tried to give an actual honest account of the conditions in which many of the Australian Aboriginals and the natives of Papua New Guinea were living at the time of contact, you would not be able to because it would fall under censorship guidelines. That's how bad it was. Like, child abuse was like sort of, a common sort of pastime. hideous genital mutilations. Something like 70% of the population in Papua New Guinea, by the time they reached adulthood, had killed at least one other person. Man, it's just, I've read accounts and they are so bad. Oh, I can't believe this. Sorry, please go on.
As I said, chutzpah reaching critical mass.
No kidding. I did not think that, like, okay, when he started saying there are other countries like that, it didn't even enter my mind that he would say that the U.S. is like that. It didn't even occur to me that he would make that because it's so just felonious.
Yeah, but
let's
what's the word?
take his argument.
Egregious. It's egregious to say that.
Yes, let's take his argument like even further than that. He is comparing the Palestinians to the Native Americans and the Aboriginal Australians. Okay, and whatever you think of the Arabs, you know, a lot of opinions out there, some good, some bad. Whatever you think of the Arabs, they had a civilization 1,000 years before a single Polish Russian Jew stepped foot on the land of Palestine.
Yes.
There are cities that predate any city in America. There are towns and farms and villages that have been there uninterrupted for 2,000 since before Roman times. This is not an empty, barren land.
Let us not forget. It wasn't like the entirety of the east coast of the United States was peopled by people of shared ancestry that had a connected civilization 1,000 or 2,000 years old, like the Middle East. No, it was disparate little native tribes. Some of them were more advanced than others, but the vast majority of all that land there was untapped wilderness. And furthermore, we did not have a big empirical superpower come in, use its might to play kickball with the natives, and then set up shop with the colonials and say, here you go, Mazel Tov. That's not how America was made. Surely Kissinger knows that.
He's got to be disingenuous because he wants to guilt trip all of us in supporting Israel. It's like, well, if Israel's a colonialist project, all the West is a colonialist project, so you've got to support us.
Yeah, you love the West. You love the West, right? You know, the West and Israel are one, aren't they?
This is a tactic I increasingly see among the containment right, which is that they use leftist framing and they just flip like a no you card, right? So, you know, things are, rather than just sidestepping the entire issue of colonialism, which is a sort of classic leftist talking point, instead, they literally exploit that thing in order to make a point that benefits them. I hate it.
Well, let's carry on, shall we?
Colonization and brutal conquest. If you go back far enough, so is almost every other country in the world.
False.
Like it or not, Israel exists.
Oh, was that pause?
Yeah, it's that claim is also false, by the way. He said, as is almost every other country. No, that's false. It's just false. Most countries have arisen from whatever ethnic group you're talking about, from any continent, living in a place for a long period of time. Factions go to battle over territory and resources, oftentimes over ideology. But most countries were not and have not been formed like Israel was. It's just false on the face of it.
Can we make a drinking game out of this video? for every anti-white argument, can we just have a shot?
Oh God, I'd be so drunk.
Yeah, man, we'd be completely wasted by the end. Like, seriously.
Yeah, I think all my dishonor is going to get used up if I do that.
Yeah.
Oh, we've had a super chat come in. Ardent Party for $2 Canadian. $2 to fight historical revisionism by that POS. Well, thank you very much, Ardent Party.
Thank you, Ardent. Good man.
And also,
good man.
Thank you. And in terms of super chats, you may also send them via Entropy if you do not want YouTube to steal 30% of the super chat. So that is there, and I've linked it as a pinned comment. So
exists. It's home to over 9 million people. The idea that they would, could, or should accept the destruction of what is now their country is absurd. The United States government would not tolerate missile strikes and terrorist rampages from Native American reservations. Neither would any government of any country under any circumstances. Peace in the Middle East will not be achieved by attempting to undo many decades of history.
What about the invasion of foreign peoples?
Yeah, that's
a lot I was actually about to say
mass migration is a weapon of mass destruction. That's terrorism.
because I was about to say, because yes, Native Americans, but it's not Native Americans. It is other certain ethnic groups that are doing that, and they let it happen.
Why doesn't Israel have open borders? It's a good question.
Well,
Yeah, it's a very
actually,
good question.
if you ask them, their actual response is that Israel is the only Jewish state, and therefore is perfectly correct in its attitude to keep ethnocentrism, unlike any other country in the world. So, white countries, for example, so like England is not allowed to say that because, you know, rather than being the English, right, saying that, you know, England is the only country for the English, they just say, oh, well, you know, whites are in other countries, right? Of course, no one asks the question of, well, what happens if you know, ethnically replace all of the white countries? You know, I mean, yeah, again, it's retarded.
Well, funny enough, the episode I had last week with Praise of Folly, Todd Lewis, was actually civic nationalism, and we were tearing this to shreds because ultimately civic nationalism is a propositional identity. Well, you know, anybody can just turn up and settle on your magic dirt, and they're just as British or American as you or I.
I mean, this is a very risky strategy, this, right? Because this whole magic dirt thing is very blood and soil, potentially. I mean, not blood, right? But soil, you know, right? Like if the dirt is magic, right? Except it's only magic in the sense that it automatically blesses anyone who steps off the boat into England. It does not in any way bless the actual English. So it's like reverse magic dirt that just sucks
Cursed
in
dirt.
It sucks in every single person of the entirety of the world who, as soon as they step off the boat, become English. But the English are not English and not bonded to that dirt. It's fucking, yeah.
Second argument centers on the idea that October 7th was a response to Israeli occupation and brutality. This, again, seems reasonable to many people.
Mm-hmm.
After all, what would it take for you to behave the way Hamas did on October 7th? The problem with this argument is that what happened on October 7th was not an attempt to weaken Israel militarily. It was not an attempt to break Hamas militants out of Israeli jails. It was not an attack on the Israeli Defense Force. It was not a prison breakout, as some people like to describe it. Because when people break out of a prison, they don't normally head to the nearest town and start massacring women and children. October 7th was, by design and implementation, a terrorist attack whose purpose was to slaughter civilians, terrify Israeli society, and nothing else. This was not an act of resistance. It was an act of terrorism.
Pause.
Which is why
I'm sorry. I'm just going to keep doing this. You don't get terrorism if
in a vacuum is what you're saying.
In a vacuum.
Right.
That terrorism is the response to the occupation and suffering.
The difference
of the
between
Palestinians.
terrorism and military engagement and successful campaigns and war crimes are who wins and who has more power. That's the difference.
But the implication, right, is that the Jews have never engaged in terrorism. This is blatantly untrue. Look at the Irgun, the Stern Gang,
9/11
both of which were folded into the IDF.
USS Liberty.
The attacks on the British in Palestine. This just goes back to this idea. Oh,
what about financial terrorism from the Rothschilds? What about that?
And then for no reason at all.
Oh, Melody.
And then
for no reason at all, October 7th, yes.
Because the thing is, like, to go off what Hunger said, because across the entire Israel-Palestine conflict, ever since 1948, thousands of Palestinians have been killed, hundreds of thousands have been displaced. So what do the Israelis expect? And it's so like hypocritical as well, because I was looking earlier, and the total number of deaths across the Israel-Palestine conflict guess how many Palestinians have been killed? So this doesn't include people who've been displaced but been killed since 1948.
What is it?
It's 44,000 to 50. It's 44,000 to 56,000. As again, most of the actual casualties are displaced, but the actual killed is 44,000 at a conservative estimate and 56,000 at an extreme estimate. 42,000
because
of those casualties have been in the past year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of Gaza.
Yeah. So that just shows you, like, the Israelis seem to think that, you know, this attack was justifiable enough for them to absolutely slam the Palestinians. So
I mean, that's like, given the size of Gaza and the size of the Palestinian population, like, those are genocide level numbers.
well, you know, when you pack an entire people into like a tiny strip of land, you're going to
And
get
then bomb the Christ out of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's 5% of the It's 5% of the entire population. 5%.
God.
Might I just point this out?
That's one out of, like, imagine where you live. That's 1 out of every 20 people that you know and see every day being killed in the last year.
Yeah. The problem with genocide, though, right, is that it is actually a crime based on intent. You know, if you look at the actual UN stuff, a lot of it is about intent, not action. So people get very, very caught up in this idea of genocide, but it's actually an incredibly imprecise term because it is an action with the intention to target or eliminate a certain ethnic group. And as the idea of genocide has sort of taken off due to the Boomer Truth regime, the actual more useful charges of things like, you know, war crimes against civilians, mass murder, have basically gone by the wayside because everyone reaches for, you know, genocide as sort of the apex term. But genocide is actually very, very hard to prove unless you can get definitive proof that the intention was to eliminate a certain ethnic group. You cannot make the charge of genocide stick.
But the leaders of Israel openly say that's what they're doing, though.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I mean, there is that, but you know.
I mean, it's not a hidden fact. We just listened to what Benjamin Netanyahu just said.
Netanyahu. That's amazing.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
No, not
Israel had
just
to
that. I want what Newsfist was saying and about the intention, and also what this absolute piece of shit is talking about. It's like for no reason at all, you know. What was Hamas's goal? Hamas's goal was just to kill people. You know, they're just savages. There was no motive behind it. They're just killer terrorists. Why did Hamas want to kill these people, Constantine? Why? Just answer that question, okay?
Because they're Islamo-fascists, obviously.
They haven't read enough
truth term.
They haven't read enough John Stuart Mill.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Speaking of Islamo-fascists,
it's coming.
Looks like you need to spend more time at the shoe range.
Saudis. Look what I got.
This guy will never have to like pay his tab in a pub for the rest of his life. Oh, he's Muslim, so not the pub, but I don't know, the shisha bar or whatever.
Actor in the manner that it has, and why
the shoe throwing never gets old. I'm sorry, I didn't know you started it up again. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Country would have done the same. The third argument is that Israel is killing civilians. This is the one claim made by the anti-Israel side that is undeniably true. However, this is an example of the emotive but irrelevant context I mentioned earlier. Civilians are always killed in war. The question is not whether they're being killed, but who bears responsibility for their deaths. And
well, Constantine, that is a consequence of modern total war. Ideally, back in the day, two armies would meet in the field, you would fight, and that would be the end of it. Okay, you occasionally might get the occasional, you know, rowdy soldier rapes or kills a couple of civilians, but they would always be punished for such a crime. You know, and nowadays it's just going to engage our just bloodlust and just, you know, frothing at the mouth that just kill people because we get like a hard on off of it.
It also matters. This is the thing. Okay, having civilians die in a war does not make that a war crime. It actually matters how and why they were killed.
Yes.
Like civilians
yes.
will always die, and there's always such the collateral damage is real. Collateral damage is completely legitimate. Collateral damage is not a war crime. Intentional, the intentional killing and massacring of people for political purposes and not a military objective is a war crime.
Again, you get caught up on the idea of intention. There is a much better test called proportionality, which is that if you have a military target and it is surrounded by 1,000 civilians and you kill those 1,000 civilians in order to get to that target, you must have a highly subjectable test of proportionality. Israel, of course, is famous for interpreting proportionality extremely broadly. I don't know if you guys are aware of the Lavender AI program that they were running when they first started bombing the hell out of Gaza, where they would just basically use AI to track Hamas soldiers, and they would just bomb them. They didn't care, who was around them. Apparently, at the start, there was, some effort to keep it under like 10 civilians per soldier, but then as it ramped up, as the target list proliferated under Lavender, they just stopped checking. So they just,
you're like, how bad would you feel if 5 people including one person in your family, died because a tactical drone strike blew up a McDonald's or a Starbucks because some idiot in the government thought there was a terrorist that might be having coffee there? That's the kind of strike. That's the kind of strikes they do in Gaza.
Well, the thing is, that's the U.S. government's drone strike policy. It's like, oh, there's a terrorist drone strike. Oops, we wiped out a whole village.
It's evil. It's wrong. I hate my government for that. The GAE is evil.
It's actually it's actually worse than that, Newsfist, because you're completely right on the Lavender AI program. The problem was the program lost. How do I say it? The program ran out of targets.
Yes.
Very quickly into the war, and then the AI actually just started randomly selecting areas because it was literally out of targets, and its programming didn't tell it to stop in case like this might be a place where terrorists are. We don't even have any intel on this anymore. It just a random place in Gaza.
Did you hear about the Lavender submodule called Daddy's Home? It was basically a way where they would track Hamas operatives until they got back to their house and then bomb the house. It was literally called Daddy's Home.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
That makes me want to Fed post in a way that I'm not comfortable with on someone else's channel.
At least the US, right, would have called it like domestic vigilance or something. It would have at least tried, to make the title sound.
But calling it Daddy's Home makes it sound like they know exactly what they're doing and take delight in it.
Yes.
I mean, what's that expression? It's like they want your kids killed and they think it's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, they want you dead. They want your children raped, and they think it's funny. That's the quote.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, Bingle, that's a really good point. What has happened to Francis?
They still have the show. It's just here. I think Constantine's thinking, right, I need to be serious and smart. So I can't have this retard with me today.
because I met both of them like way back in the day when they were just doing live shows in Camden. Francis was quite nice, but Constantine was a bit of a dick. And I got to say that the last few times I saw Francis, particularly I think after October 7th kicked off when he was on the show with Constantine, he had this look in his eyes like he was very freaked out. Like, this was much larger than what he had signed on for, which really makes me wonder, especially given the way that Kissen has sort of moved, whether he suddenly realized that he was in fact chained to, how should I put this, larger forces, as it were.
Yes, probably thinking.
Are you saying Kissen and Foster are an abusive relationship?
Yeah. I mean, yes, yes, quite possibly. Actually, yes, quite possibly.
I
can believe it.
I just love this comment for Lukey World. I thought the pair of them looked like Bill and Ben, the flower pot men. Yeah, Yizz and Hunger probably don't know, but there was a British children TV show called Bill and Ben, the flower pot men, and it was like puppets. They were like these little gnome men who were in. Yeah, I might have to find an image of it and show it later.
No, I was
And who
not
can stop
aware.
the
I didn't
killing?
know.
Again, applying first principles thinking, we must reach for a comparable example. There is no exact equivalent that comes to mind, but there is some useful context we can consider. Hamas has repeatedly stated that given the opportunity, they will repeat the October 7th attacks again and again and again. While this may seem shocking to us in the West, it makes perfect sense given that Hamas believes Israel is illegitimate and would like to see it gone. This means that unless Israel destroys or degrades their ability to carry out their threats, it is likely to experience more terrorist attacks again and again. Does anyone seriously believe that any government of any country anywhere in the world would or could react to something like 12 9/11s in one day and the threat of more to follow as many times as possible?
12 9/11s in one day now.
It's like 10,000 9/11s. Oh my God. You mean 19,000 1100?
This is like watching a Ben Shapiro speech at half speed.
Yeah,
we
so
just
he's
speed it up.
he's basically the British Ben Shapiro at this point, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, Douglas Murray doesn't. I mean, I guess Douglas Murray is also doing his part. But yeah, it is. It's like the resemblance is uncanny. It's not just me, right? Like
No,
even
it's not.
the cadence and the tone, although it's slowed down, is very, very similar. The talking points, the argument structure. It's not just me, right?
I wonder if there's a genetic component to that.
High verbal IQ, perhaps.
Very high verbal IQ
indeed.
Oh, just
No,
very
but
quickly.
just oh,
You see, here's Bill and Ben. There's kissing, and there's Francis.
I can see. Yeah, I see why you say that.
Oh, dude.
Possible.
no, sorry, just on that
Anything
point,
other than all
just quickly on Kissin's point. If you watch that debate, I mean, it's not really a debate. If you watch that talk with Saifuddin Ammous and Konstantin Kissin, Saifuddin keeps on. He repeatedly makes the point. What the Palestinians, when Palestinians respond, it's terrorism. When Israel responds, it's legitimate military activity. And he's just going to keep repeating that line over and over and over again. So, okay, if Hamas commits another October 7, that's terrorism. But if the Israeli Knesset debates letting their soldiers rape Palestinian prisoners, that's not that's completely legitimate military action.
Well, it's what I said earlier about who controls the narrative gets to decide what's a war crime and what's a successful campaign. Look at what the GAE did to Iraq. It's despicable, and yet that's considered a success for freedom. It's considered a successful war campaign. But I mean, it's despicable what we did to Iraq. It's despicable what the GAE did to Afghanistan. It's awful.
War? And who can end the killing? Well, theoretically, Israel could, of course, but for the reason we just discussed, they can't, won't, and shouldn't. That leaves Hamas, who could have returned the hostages and surrendered the people who took them. What is more, they could hide their civilians in the vast network of tunnels they've built to reduce casualties. Instead, they refuse to build bomb shelters and do everything they can to maximize civilian casualties. That's not my opinion. It's something Hamas are themselves proud of.
You see, we're trying to genocide you. How dare you try and protect your citizens from the genocide we're perpetuating on you? Honestly, how could you?
A senior spokesman for the group, Sami Abu Zuhri, gave an interview on Palestinian station Al-Aqsa TV the last time this conflict flared up. The policy of people confronting Israeli warplanes with their bare chests in order to protect their homes has proven effective against the occupation, he said. We in Hamas call upon our people to adopt this policy in order to protect Palestinian homes. So yes, the deaths of civilians are tragic, and in a modern world where you can fill your social media feed with gruesome footage, that tragedy can be broadcast straight into your home 24/7. But the responsibility for their deaths is entirely with Hamas, and the failure to put a stop to the killing is theirs and theirs alone. Which brings us to the final argument. Israel's attacks are indiscriminate and designed to inflict civilian casualties. This is actually the simplest argument of the four to address because it is an empirical matter. The war in Gaza is not the first conflict in human history. We can compare the ratio of combatant to civilian deaths in this war to others. What happens when we do? Historically, urban warfare operations result in a casualty ratio of 9 civilians for every 1 enemy fighter killed. In Gaza, it is 2 to 1. In other words, despite the deliberate attempts by...
Okay, do you know how he gets that number? It's because Israel calls like every man above 14 a possible terrorist threat, a possible combatant.
Yeah, that is clearly bullshit. 2 to 1? Come on. Have you seen an aerial picture of Gaza? Like, fuck me, right? I mean, there's no way of knowing how many people actually died in Gaza until they remove all the rubble. There is just no way. You seriously?
You're going to say something else, but go on.
Seriously, trying to tell me, right, that you can do like accurate body counts under like collapsed buildings? Oh, mate, no, that's complete bullshit.
I didn't know there were 2 million terrorists in Gaza. I'm just saying. I didn't know.
and Nami El Kazin
6 million 9/11s.
Yeah, six Gorillion 9/11s. But no, Nami El Kazin brings up a good point that I've seen articles and clips on Twitter about IDF indiscriminately firing so much into Gaza that they don't even know who they're shooting and killing sometimes.
Yeah, there's video of this. Israel has actually killed, I would say, like a significant percentage of the hostages that have been taken in Gaza as well. It was a very, very harrowing video of these 3 Israelis that were released. I mean, they either escaped or were released by Hamas. They run towards the IDF, and then the IDF shoots them, even though they're speaking Hebrew, because maybe they have a bomb on them. You know, who knows? They don't. These people, the IDF, that the forces they sent into Gaza were not well trained people. These were 18-year-old, 19-year-old reservists who had, barely had a year of training firing a gun. This was not the professional military that went into Gaza, and it really reeks of the lack of professionalism in the IDF. That, putting aside the entire aerial bombing campaign, just the people on the ground are terrible at their job.
Well, it depends on the objective, right? If the objective is just to literally raise all of Gaza to the ground, render it uninhabitable, and export the population to Europe, then actually, does it really matter that, a lot of these IDF grunts are untrained? It's not a complicated objective. I have honestly, I've thought this since it really, really kicked off, that the goal is to force as many Gazans as possible into a sort of enclave by the sea, and then get them off and send them to Europe. And I remember thinking this, especially when the US built that pier that cost like $300 million and lasted for like a couple of days. It made me wonder whether it wasn't blown up by Hamas. Yeah, well, I don't know, but it would.
So that's where FEMA's budget went.
It would, it would be more consistent with broader Israeli goals if you look at their actions as opposed to what they say. So, for example, Israel for ages has been saying, "Oh, they want a 2-state solution." I see no evidence of that. I cannot see any evidence that they are seriously considering a 2-state solution at all. I saw some footage of Rabbi Schneerson the other night. He was basically saying, "Look, we're not going to give any territory back. If anyone asks, say, we're doing negotiations because it looks good, but, we're not giving any territory back because of Eretz Israel, which I believe is like Greater Israel, or, the religious concept of the land given to them by God. So there's a clear sort of religious motivation in this as well.
Well, I mean, going back to the idea of the 2-state solution, I mean, of course, Israel supports the idea of a 2-state solution. We've got the actual Israel state, and then we've got the occupied Palestinian state. So that's their 2-state solution.
No, I don't think so. I think.
I was being facetious.
Yeah, but no, I think it's pretty clear they want to wipe out the West Bank and they want to wipe out Gaza, and then they'll build, I don't know, condos on Gaza on top of the bones, and
gay nightclubs.
Yeah, gay nightclubs, and get the gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean going. That seems to be a very clear goal, and also that is also a very clear strategic goal. This is one of the other things that annoys me about the Israelis, is that they never sort of say that they have any strategic goals, right? This sort of feeds into this idea that they're always on the defense, that they're just defending themselves, as though Israel does not have strategic goals in the Middle East. Of course they have strategic goals. The way they tell it, it's only, countries like, Iran or, Hezbollah has strategic goals. We don't have any strategic goals. We're just trying to survive. I don't believe that for a second. Like, you're telling me that a military as complicated and, competent when it comes to planning as the IDF has no strategic goals. The state of Israel has no strategic goals. They're just trying to defend themselves. I don't buy it.
No, certainly. I'm sorry, I was going to say something, but I've lost. My mind's gone blank now.
Oh, sorry, mate.
Let's finish this up. There's only a minute left.
With this absolute.
Yeah, okay, keep playing.
That's like what I was going to say was, you were talking about, the Israeli soldiers are quite young. I can verify that from when I think it was War Monitor, who's been sharing some of the stuff coming out of Lebanon, and he was showing some of the ages and names of Israeli soldiers that have been killed, and it's all guys that are under 30. And I sit here thinking, Israel, this is really worth it. You're just throwing all of your youth away in this pointless conflict.
They have reservist majors and lieutenant colonels in their early 30s. I mean, that is insane.
I noticed that. Yeah, I saw that. It was like, oh yes, 25-year-old captain. I'm like, what? It's like 25, 23-year-old major. I'm like, excuse me.
You would be an E3 or an E. You would still be an E2 or E3 in the U.S. military.
Yeah.
Hamas to increase the number of civilian casualties, Israel has been extraordinarily successful in reducing them. This doesn't mean that there won't be incidents in which innocent Palestinians are killed, and, as in any war, there will likely be war crimes committed by both sides. But overall, the numbers don't lie. If you need further evidence that claims of Israel's indiscriminate attacks are nonsense, just look at the way various commentators reacted to what has been dubbed Operation Grim Beaper. Thousands of Hezbollah pages were rigged with explosives and then detonated simultaneously, killing and injuring thousands of terrorists and a small number of bystanders. The pages in question were not picked at random. Israel specifically selected a batch of senior Hezbollah operatives. And still, people like Humza Yousaf, Scotland's former First Minister, complain about Israel's indiscriminate attacks. This was definitionally the most precise, targeted and surgical large-scale anti-terrorist operation in human history. In summary, I've engaged with an open mind and in good faith with all the anti-Israel arguments presented to me over the last year. On balance, I regard them as disingenuous, irrelevant, and designed to pull at my heartstrings in order to obscure the harsh reality of this conflict. We would respond exactly the way that Israel has. The only difference is we would do so with the support of every member of the international community, while Israel has to fight not only the terrorists who want to wipe them off the map, but Western apologists for those terrorists as well. If you enjoy these videos, you should know that they're available on my Substack weeks.
All right, that's enough of this.
Well,
okay. So in closing there, this is what I hate and have come to really hate about not just IDW, but online punditry and online discourse. It's riddled with hatchling, midwittery, what's the word I'm looking for? Mott and Bailey when it serves me, but Steelman when it serves me, to make a point to impress all of the gullible normies and midwits who are listening. But it's like he clearly went into this with the biases that we know he has, and we knew what he would come out with. The rest of it is just a magic show for the people that don't have much of an opinion and can't think well for themselves. That's what I've come to hate about online discourse in every kind. I'm sick of it.
No, I mean, we've seen the chutzpah, but I've never seen that much chutzpah in a minute video.
That was quite a bit of chutzpah.
Okay, well, I've got some more stuff on Twitter, so let me just pull this up. So we've got a post here from Keith Woods, someone I'm not really a fan of, but this is important. So he posted this yesterday. The Rebbe Schneerson considered non-Jews to be subhuman, possessing satanic souls. This is who the American Jewish community and Donald Trump are honoring today. So Keith Woods posts this, and then today, Keith Woods was permanently banned off YouTube for violating their hate speech policy. And then
what?
Yeah, Keith. Yeah, if you actually go to Keith Woods' account, he confirmed it. He's actually been permanently banned off YouTube.
Yeah, I saw this today.
Yeah, and then our friend Cringe Walker, Rip Bozo.
What? I have a question. You don't have to answer publicly if you don't want, but what is it that caused the schism with Mr. Keith Woods and the people that we cavort with in the sphere that we're in? I still don't know. Well, what caused that?
Well, from my understanding, it's basically down to the fact that, well, it first happened with AA, because I think a few years ago, AA and Keith Woods didn't like each other, then they made up, and then they fell out again. And it's all because Woods palled around with Joel Davis, who I think is a complete psychopath, and no one should associate with him.
I don't like Davis or Spencer. I think they're both manipulative, evil pieces of shit. I don't like them.
I did like Keith. He was obviously a word.
I'm not calling Keith that. That's my opinion on Davis and Spencer. Keith, I think, is
no. I agree with that.
Yeah. Well, I had to like Keith since it was only in the debate. No, true. That was their original falling out, but then there was a year where they actually did talk to each other and kind of made up, and then they fell out again after AA fell out with Joel Davis. And then,
I mean, as we all know, AA is absolutely terrible in debates.
Yes. He has his strengths, and debating is not one of them.
But then what happens, from what I recall, is Woods was then on the whole Kanye, yay 2024 bullshit, and that's where I kind of was like, I don't know if I'm going to listen to you anymore, because that seems like a stupid thing to do.
Yeah.
And then AA had this whole well, I'm not going to associate anybody that associates with you, and then he's kind of dropped.
So that's where that comes from. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
because I'm not a big Keith Woods follower, but I listen to a lot of the clips of his that go around, and I've listened to several of his long dissertation videos where he talks about a single topic for like an hour, and he seems really like a relatable, smart guy that says things I agree with. So I was confused why people in our cluster don't like him. Is it just because of the association with Davis?
And well, it's the A stuff, the association with Davis, and the fact that AA is just like hates him, and a lot of people out there.
So AA really does have that level of influence then. Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot. Honestly, I've seen times where AA's fallen out with someone, and there's just sycophants in replies on Twitter going, "Oh yes, yeah, AA, we completely agree with you," and it's just like, maybe have a mind of your own, possibly.
Yeah. Regardless, like I said, I'm not like a big main follower of Woods, but I've listened to a lot of his stuff over the last 4 years, and he seems like a smart, agreeable guy that I want to like. So until I have reasons to not like him, I'll keep liking him.
I was listening to him during the recent, Ireland protests when that was kicking off. Yeah, he was a great resource on that.
Yeah. And he didn't say anything I found disagreeable in all of that. So that's a good one.
Got some good comic relief from good old Endeavour.
I like Endeavour. He's a good guy.
Yeah, very, very good. Okay, and then I decided to have a bit of a meme earlier. So obviously, as we know, earlier in this conflict, the American soldier Aaron Bushnell self-immolated, and then we had the other guy last week, and well, a second shitlib has self-immolated.
We covered this, yes. He didn't even do it right. Okay, that was pathetic.
Yeah, I won't lie, and I'm loath to quote Karl Marx, but history has a habit of repeating itself. The first time as tragedy, the second time as farce.
Oh, so true, so true.
Okay, and then I reposted an old meme I made some months ago. This is the left after Palestine is victorious. I don't want to play with you anymore.
Yeah, I saw that one going around.
And time to check in on the world's most important Giga Zionist, King Crocoduck.
Oh, God.
Oh no! Oh god!
Oh God. What? What?
What?
I don't even understand this meme. It must be a
I can
leftist
I
meme.
can I can explain this. I can explain this.
Oh
One
man,
part.
this hurts to look at. Ah, sorry.
Like, are they? Is this meme trying to say that Palestine is a product of the Nazbol vortex? Is that what that's trying to say? 'Cause that doesn't
Basically.
make any
Yes.
sense.
I mean, it's not completely inaccurate because both the Nazis and the Soviets did support the Palestinian cause at different times, but to varying degrees. And this is the thing. So there's this actually Bernard Lewis, who hey man, we've been talking about Bernard Lewis a lot. He makes this point that the Arab nationalists always supported the enemy of the colonial powers, being obviously the UK, France, America.
Yeah.
And so when the Nazis were the enemy, the Palestinians supported the Nazis. When the USSR was the enemy, the Palestinians supported the Soviet Union. So that explains the meme, but that's why that meme is there. But that doesn't make it any less nonsensical.
Because to me, that this
communism
meme
and
is saying
fascism didn't create.
Yeah, because the meme seems to say that Palestine is a direct product of Nazbol vortex, which I don't see that as being the case.
Oh no, it's retarded. But like I'm trying to explain to you the grain of truth behind the meme.
Oh no, I got it. No, thank you. I get it now. Thank you.
Well, the thing is you're dealing with Zionists, so high verbal IQ.
Oh yeah, high verbal IQ. I'm just not smart enough to keep up, I guess.
And also, Hunger, you may remember this, but remember months ago where he went on this insane, like, mental Twitter post where he was saying, like, I want like Palestine to like be trans, gay, degenerate,
Yes.
and it's like, oh my god, what is wrong with you? It's like
I make a habit of not interacting with ultra Zionists. I mean, I genuinely do, and this guy is. He's had quite a few debates with Dave Distributist. I mean, he's had quite a few talks with our friends, particularly Dave. And as far as I can tell, every single argument is special pleading. It's like, yes, but not in the case of us. Like, yes, but it's different. Yes, but we're the chosen people.
No, and so Newsfist has just sent me something. Shall I share this on screen, Newsfist?
Yeah. So, just a bit of background. This is important. I know you had a little bit
of
a thing about Rabbi Schneerson. So Trump recently visited the Ohe, I believe it's called, which is the grave of Rabbi Schneerson. Now, Rabbi Schneerson is the sort of pre-messiah to the Chabad sect, and Chabad are incredibly influential. I have a clip, I didn't save it, but I did see it, where I believe it was James Baker, who was ex-US Secretary of State, who was saying that, in his opinion, Chabad is more powerful than the CIA. And I could honestly believe this. They are incredibly organized. They have incredible resources, incredible influence, and incredible reach. And in terms of sort of modern political Kabbalistic Judaism, they are by far the most significant force. If anyone remembers the Tunnel Jews, for example, that was the Chabad headquarters in New York, of which they have is sort of like the main base, place called 70 Brooklyn Avenue, number 70 is what they call it. And that whole Tunnel Jew thing was basically due to a property dispute within two sort of sections of Chabad. And Chabad are very, very Kabbalistic. So they draw a lot of stuff from Lurian Kabbalism. Isaac Luria, who was like big in it was the 15th century, basically sort of denoted these ideas that I was talking about before: the shattering of the world, the spreading of the sparks, the idea that all the sparks had to be sort of put together in one place, the sort of divine teleology of the world to come. All these kinds of stuff have drifted into Chabad. Again, watch that video of mine, me and Yizz on Empire of Lies. I'll post it again in the chat if you're interested. Chabad are now basically so powerful that really, if you are talking about organized Jewry in the US, you you have to mention Chabad. In my opinion, they are the largest and most organized group of Jews in the US. So they are, but they, as usual, they wield a lot of their influences, behind the scenes, because people don't really know that they exist, but they do, and they have extraordinary influence.
Well, no, well, thank you. So do you want me to read through this, or?
Yeah, maybe just skim it. I'll go. So yeah, Trump went to the Ojai. He basically did like a prayer there. Sort of, saying that, he wants like a double blessing from the rabbi in order to sort of have his rulership be blessed and all this kind of other stuff. Now, whether or not, obviously the people on 4chan are like, oh my God, this proves that Trump is a Jew. Well, maybe, but also if you want the support of this section of organized Jewry, you have to do this kind of stuff. You have to go and, well, not exactly kiss the ring, but say the prayer, ask for the blessing. So the question really is, as to go back to our earlier point, if Trump gets in, what is his opinion on the relation between Israel and the Jewish people and the US going to be? Although Netanyahu famously was a close friend of Rabbi Schneerson, whether it can be said that the state of Israel and Chabad share exactly the same goals, I'm not really sure, but they're definitely very close.
I see. Mm. Do you want me to scroll down a bit more, or?
No, it's okay. I think that's basically it. Maybe post it in the chat if people want to check it out themselves. There's a sort of a lot of sort of religious stuff in there.
Hang on. Yeah, I've just dropped it in the chat if people want to read that in their own time. And now got a funny video. Because I said there'd be memes.
Oh no!
To pull back from the brink. I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages, and a recommitment to the two-state solution. A recognized Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel.
I too would like the return of the sausages.
The return.
I actually just finished my sausage negotiation course. I'm now a certified sausage negotiator.
Oh dear.
I was trying to think of a clever way to weave in the word sausage to Lebensraum, but I couldn't do it.
I don't believe sausages are kosher.
They're not? They sell Jewish hot dogs. A hot dog's basically a sausage.
Oh, well, I guess if it's not made of pork, like if it's an Aberdeen Angus one, I guess they could have it.
Yeah, beef sausages are fine.
Yeah. Because like the best beef hot dogs you can get in America are all kosher.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, I've now got a video from Caspian Report. So they're like a geopolitics channel. I think they're a little bit Western biased, but this video I think is quite interesting because it just shows how much the Israelis are going to have it in for Palestine in the near future. So we'll give this a bit of a watch.
This video shows Israeli rollers, bulldozers, and trucks paving a new road along the Gaza-Egypt border. They're building a new buffer zone known as the Philadelphia Corridor, and the Israelis are there to stay. Here is what it looks like during the day. New realities on the ground are being designed, realities that hint at Israel's endgame for Gaza. Zooming out, we can see Israel building road networks all across the Gaza Strip, with some being kilometers wide, including a buffer zone around the edges of the enclave. These will be fortified with checkpoints, watchtowers, bases, and other surveillance tools. Using these...
Basically, they just want to turn Gaza into like one giant like prison camp, essentially.
It's already a prison camp.
I mean, it already is, right?
Yeah.
Like
well, it is, but an even more stricter prison camp.
This is the panopticon, basically.
Yeah. My God. And they'll be able to just shut down any of these zones if they want. So if they want to move the population, further south, they could just shut off all incoming like water
This,
and electricity.
This gives me very Final Solution vibes.
Yeah,
yeah,
for real.
And I will say, has anyone here seen the film Johnny English?
I don't think so. I've heard the name before. Let me look it up.
Not for ages. That's
that's
right?
that's Mr. Bean. Yeah,
Yeah.
the Mr. Bean films.
Oh yeah, no, I've been told to watch that before, and I really want to. I've seen clips of it, and it looks great.
No, it's Rowan Atkinson. He's like this bumbling secret agent, but in the film, the villain, Pascal Sauvage, who's trying to become the king, his plan is when he becomes the king, he wants to turn the UK into like a giant prison colony and put all the world's crime there. And like looking at this just reminds me of his like mastermind plan.
I can see why that reminds you of that. Yeah.
You mean, or just looking at the UK generally? You mean?
Right, or that? Yes.
Yeah, all that. Yeah.
Strategic corridors. The Israeli army will be able to monitor any point in Gaza without necessarily occupying the entire territory. The idea is that in post-war Gaza, whenever Hamas fighters surface from underground and prepare to fire rockets, the Israelis would detect them in no more than a few minutes and launch a counterstrike. The Israeli leadership believes these corridors would make further Hamas transgressions improbable in the long term, or at least decrease the damage they can inflict. The Palestinian civilian population would be able to return, though they would reside within smaller chunks of territory, each disconnected from the other. Conflict is like that. The hand that wins gets to draw the map. Meanwhile, a second front has gone hot in the north. Israeli forces have entered Lebanese territory, and Iran responded by firing missiles at Israel. The battle space is expanding. However, while all eyes are elsewhere, the Israeli master plan for Gaza is going ahead at full speed. I genuinely believe that seeing all sides is paramount at times like this.
Going to skip past this because it's like a internal ad in the video. So.
I don't know what the Gazans are worried about. I keep hearing that 15-minute cities are great.
I will say, looking at this, it's not hard to compare it to the West now because if you think about it, we basically live in a prison colony that you're just monitored and maintained at all times, kept atomized from other people in your country ultimately. So
the difference is you're allowed to leave.
Yeah. I don't know, perhaps the goal is to...
So far.
Yeah, perhaps we'll all get our own personal Gaza one day.
Political minefield behind closed doors. Much of the negotiations converge around the configurations of Israeli buffer zones within Gaza in the form of extrajudicial corridors. Netanyahu is adamant about two, but a third one is already under construction and two more are in the pipeline. Using these corridors, Israel will have the means to permanently dictate life in Gaza while giving its troops the flexibility to deploy quickly throughout the enclave. One of the primary sticking points in the negotiations so far has been the Philadelphia corridor, specifically who will control it. Measuring roughly 14 kilometers in length and 100 meters in width, the corridor bisects Gaza's Rafah municipality and Egypt's Sinai region. It runs from the Mediterranean Sea to the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is the meeting point of Gaza, Egypt, and Israel. The corridor also includes the Rafah crossing, the only transit point between Egypt and Gaza. However, this crossing has been opened and closed repeatedly throughout the years, depending on the security circumstances. Under the 1979 agreement, Israel was allowed to deploy limited armed forces in the corridor, but no...
Just to give a bit of context to this, because from 1948 until the 79-78, Egypt and Israel were still technically at war that whole time. It was only when Sadat negotiated a treaty with Israel and Kissinger that all of this came about, essentially. Have I got that right, Hang, or have I missed anything?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Oh, so I was just saying that the context for all of this is the fact that Israel and Egypt negotiated a long-lasting peace in the late 70s under Sadat, and that this is the context for all of this, ultimately.
Yes, and this is, well, I mean, you also have to take into account this deal was made because Israel controlled the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip. So in exchange for returning Sinai to Egypt, the Israelis kept control over Gaza, and until they unilaterally left Gaza in 2005. So yeah, this was still occupied territory by Israel after, this deal was made. So it makes sense for there to be Israeli forces on the Philadelphia corridor.
And just give this all back to the British. No, we were the ones who made this problem in the first place.
No, give it all back to God with glorious nuclear hellfire.
Amen.
Oy vey.
No more than 4 infantry battalions, including the appropriate military infrastructure. However, Israel was not allowed to deploy tanks, artillery, or anti-aircraft missiles. So the operation of the Philadelphia corridor was coordinated mainly by Egypt, and this arrangement formed a fundamental component of the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. In 2005, Israel withdrew its army from Gaza as part of a disengagement plan. This exit included a withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor, as well as the withdrawal of about 9,000 Israeli settlers living in 25 illegal settlements in Gaza. Egypt then assumed full responsibility over the Philadelphia corridor, and the Palestinian Authority was later brought into the mission. Shortly after, a second legal agreement was signed between Egypt and Israel, allowing the former to deploy 750 border guards to patrol the corridor for counterterrorism and non-military purposes. Egypt's responsibility expanded, and it was now tasked with preventing smuggling and infiltration. 2 years later, in 2007, Hamas took complete control of the Gaza Strip and removed the Palestinian Authority from the region. Israel responded by enacting a land, air, and sea blockade of the Gaza Strip. Nobody was getting in or out without Israeli say. Egypt, meanwhile, would intermittently open the Rafah crossing during that time. Stuck in between Egypt and Israel, Hamas opted for a new strategy. It started building tunnels between Gaza and Egypt's Sinai. This underground infrastructure was used for smuggling goods and weapons, but the scale was enormous. Between 2011 and 2015, Egyptian forces destroyed more than 2,000 of these Hamas tunnels. And these were only the
Israelis are thinking, oi, don't build those tunnels, that's our idea.
I was going to say it's tunnel Muslims instead of tunnel Jews.
Well, what about tunnel Semites? That's even more inclusive.
How much were they charging rent on those tunnels?
Well, I don't know. They live rent-free in our heads, don't they?
The passages that were detected. Using these tunnels, Hamas created new realities on the ground. The Rafah crossing was no longer the sole entry and exit point to Gaza. More importantly, neither Egypt nor Israel exercised any control over the tunnels. Netanyahu and his cabinet have identified the Philadelphia corridor and the Hamas tunnels running underneath as the single weakest link in the chain surrounding Gaza. So, when the current hostilities started, Israel took back control of the corridor in May 2024. It is now insisting on maintaining a presence there in order to prevent Hamas from replenishing its lost resources. Netanyahu's cabinet argues that without Israeli control over the Philadelphia corridor, Hamas will rearm and build up its military force and infrastructure in a few years. This then will turn Gaza into a long-term security liability for the state of Israel. Hamas sees it differently. Its negotiators demand that all Israeli forces be pulled from the corridor and that the area return to Hamas control as part of a lasting ceasefire. Egypt, too, is not happy about the continued Israeli presence in the corridor. The Egyptians argued that permanent, large-scale Israeli military presence in the area would violate the 1979 peace treaty. Technically, they make a valid.
Yeah, I think that's enough of the video. We've got the general gist of it. yeah, Israel just wants to keep Palestine as like a permanent prison colony for them to just keep exploiting. So
because
yeah,
if you think about it, if Israel wanted peace and wanted to stop the Hamas terror attacks, which I don't think they do for reasons that Newsfist and others brought up earlier, it's a tiny place that they could just withdraw from and say, okay, it's yours now, Mazel Tov, goodbye, and then build big walls around it and say, don't come over here, but you're free now. Like, we're done with you. Goodbye. We're not going to bomb you anymore. Stop bombing us. And maybe if they did that, some kind of peace could be reached in a way. But if I don't think they want that. I think that they want total annihilation and control, because if you look at the people who speak in places of leadership for both the religious leadership and political leadership of Israel, neither one want that. They want total victory and the humiliation and destruction of any force that they see as against them, which is basically everyone that isn't them.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, with people, they've decided we can't live with these people. National security and existence as a people in this land is contingent on everyone else being under our thumb. And if everyone else is not under our thumb in the region, then we'll all be wiped out one day. That's the paranoid Jewish fear, which is not entirely incorrect, I should say.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I agree. I don't think that coexistence really is possible, but the Israelis certainly have not helped. I mean, just look at them sidelining the PLO and boosting Hamas. The PLO, unlike Hamas, was not only quite moderate, but had links with a number of Western countries, the UK in particular. I mean, not many people remember this, but up until relatively recently, I think the 1980s.
Was it the PLO that was tight with the IRA, or am I thinking of another one?
No, that's the one. I mean, there were more than one. There was the
one struggle.
One struggle.
Liberation of Palestine, the People's Front of Judea, or the Judeans Front. Everyone knows the meme
about this.
Everyone knows the meme. There's more than one, version of the PLO.
Yeah,
but it's like you said, they were very moderate. It was also secular. Hamas is a specifically radical Sunni Muslim group, and no, I'm not defending Hamas. I've never defended Hamas the entire stream. No one denies these are bad people.
Oh, of course.
It just makes sense why they're doing what they're doing. They don't do terrorism for no reason, which is what. Yeah, but the PLO, there were Christian members of the PLO.
Yeah, and
always
I
just wanted to add
PLO were actually doing like actual proper negotiations and were actually working towards a two-state solution. So it could be that the point at which a two-state solution might have actually come about was the point at which the PLO had to be removed. But this goes back to whether you think that Israel actually has ever wanted a two-state solution, or whether they just keep saying that they do. But the goal really is just to reclaim all of Eretz Israel. And I guess that depends on which group of Israelis you're talking to, because the Israelis are not a monolith. Obviously, only an idiot thinks that. There are left-wing Israelis, right-wing Israelis, but Netanyahu and the people around him seem to be very, very much leaning towards the Chabad interpretation that all of Eretz Israel must be reclaimed and that they will never give any territory back.
Yeah, I absolutely believe the ideological religious element is the dominant governing element in this, on both sides, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you essentially have, I mean, this is really quite interesting, because no one seems to point out that the Israel Hamas thing is actually an excellent argument for why you can't have two religious groups occupying the same patch of land, and why balkanization happens and the perils of that balkanization. But for some reason, no one ever brings that up in relation to any country other than Israel. Like no one ever says, "Oh yeah, look at Israel, Hamas. This is why we shouldn't let all these like Muslims or into the UK, for example." Like, it'll be fine, bros.
Yep, good point.
No, thank you for all your points. And love Arden Party's comment here. Love when they call them Hamas. Well, at least not Hamas.
We could go anime with it and call them Hamasaru.
Hamasaru.
Abasaru.
I'm more of a booba guy myself. Not gonna lie.
Oh dear.
I'm a centrist on this question.
A sensible centrist.
Sensible centrist, yes. Well, gentlemen, is there anything else you want to talk about or go over before we wrap up? I feel like we've covered all the bases here.
I think we've done a good analysis and reflection back, and managed to survive the tidal wave of chutzpah. And as we've been talking about Hamas, I've got one more clip for this evening.
I want to first of all say thank you everyone for being here tonight, and say that tomorrow evening it will be my pleasure and my honour to host an event in Parliament where our friends from Hezbollah will be speaking. I'd also invited friends from Hamas to come and speak as well. Unfortunately, the Israelis would not allow them to travel here, so it's going to be only friends from Hezbollah. So far as I'm concerned, that is absolutely the right function of using parliamentary facilities to invite people from other parts of the world.
Well,
and this is why Corbyn has
me that clip many times.
And you wonder why Corbyn is no more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, is there anything you would like to share before we leave? Newsfist.
Yes, I do a twice weekly news show called Happening TV, where I cover current news and funny videos and some cute animals to soothe you. That's at 8 p.m. London time. If you go to newsfist.net, you can find like all of my links. I'll drop it in the chat. And of course, I do Empire of Lies with Yizz on Thursday at 11 p.m. London time. Check it out. It's I don't know. I've been told that it cures cancer. Warning: Empire of Lies doesn't actually cure cancer. Curing cancer is something that should be done with your doctor, allegedly, as long as your doctor is not Anthony Fauci.
What a great disclaimer. Yes.
I do a weekly panel podcast similar to this one called Discordant Dragons on Monday evenings, 6 p.m. Eastern America, 11 p.m. UK. And we have 5 news topics we cover, and then we look at memes and funny videos and cute stuff and white pilling things at the end. It's a good time. I definitely invite you to that. And of course, I work with my good friend Newsfist here on Thursday evenings, same time slot, 6 p.m. Eastern US, 11 p.m. UK, called The Empire of Lies. And like he said, he's heard that it cures cancer. It's a good 1 hour discussion stream, just me and him, where we'll pick a topic and we'll chat about it. And we have prepared presentation material. When we don't do a pre-scripted presentation, we what's the word for that? Not intercede. We intersperse the Empire of Lies streams in the same time slot with a Gulag Cafe, which is where we just pick a topic and we chat about it for an hour and we talk to the chat. It's really cozy. You should come check it out. And that's it.
Hunger.
Yep, you can just follow me at Hunger Die, DYE. And for related news, please follow the Old Glory Club. If you are in the States, United States, find your local Old Glory Club chapter. That is theoldgloryclub.com. We will be having many events in our local chapters very soon, which I will get to in a later stream. I apologize. I wasn't prepared for that show right away.
No, thank you. And in terms of this channel, I believe the next episode of the Chatham House version Hunger, was that this Saturday or next Saturday?
I believe that's next Saturday. Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah, that's the 20. Wait, no. We'll talk about that off stream.
Yeah, I knew it was coming up. I just wasn't certain. But yeah, the next
I believe
part
the
of our
26th.
series. Okay, is the next part of our episode of the Chatham House version will be in the coming weeks, and we'll be talking about the disaster that was the creation of the Kingdom of Iraq. So if you're interested, please check that out. And thank you everybody for watching, and good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.